As I read the Constitution, I continue to be surprised by what the administration does, and I don't normally speak like this from this bench very often, but I wanted to share just a couple of my thoughts today. As I read the Constitution, Article 1 says all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in Congress of the United States. What the President did yesterday, in my opinion, was in fact legislation. I wonder where does the President get such authority to make such executive orders? And as I studied this a little bit, I found out that it comes from Article 3 of the Constitution. I'm sorry, Article 2 of the Constitution, Section 3. It's really a small phrase. It says, "He shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed." And that is the phrase that gives the President authority to make such an executive order. Simply stated, what this means is the President has the responsibility to fill in the holes where Congress passes a law and trying to implement that law sometimes requires some clarity and some direction, and the President has the right to do that. That would be a proper use of an executive order, but what he did yesterday, in my opinion, is unconstitutional. I spent a lot of time studying the Second Amendment and thinking about the Second Amendment and why this is important to the people that we represent. We took an oath to uphold the Constitution. I take that very seriously. The Second Amendment, let me just read it one more time. It says, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." The Kansas Constitution is clear that the citizens of Kansas have an individual right to bear arms. We changed our Constitution in 2010 with 89% of the vote, which I believe is a national record for any item in any state. I believe 89% is unprecedented on something such as this. But we have an individual right to bear arms. And then Justice Scalia, during the Heller decision, made very clear comments that the individual citizens of this country have the right to bear arms. And you reflect, there's been a lot of discussion about what does a well-regulated militia mean. Simply stated, as it's been interpreted by the Supreme Court, means that it's a well-trained citizenry. People have a responsibility to defend themselves, and I would say they really should do so. What I see this administration doing, in my opinion, is they show distrust of the people. I think the government needs to trust its people. And as the Founding Fathers wrote this, it was clear they didn't trust the government. It says, "necessary for the security of a free state." The word state there is referring to the nation, the individual nations of 13 colonies that they thought of as nations, if you will. If you read the Declaration of Independence, the very last paragraph, it made it very clear. They were referring to themselves as sovereign nations. And to secure that freedom required the people to be armed. I'm disappointed because I believe that the President has overstepped his authority. I know at least one other state has already talked about legal actions to address this executive order. I don't know what we can do as a county commission. This is really not county commission business, but I am certainly impacted personally by this. It bothers me greatly. I think we need to do whatever we can as a county commission to let our wishes be known. And I would entertain potentially a legislative agenda item on our platform to encourage the state legislature to do a resolution encouraging Congress to, in fact, repeal this executive order with whatever action they can take. It has been done by some presidents. They have repealed executive orders of prior presidents. So whether it be legal action or action of Congress or an action of the next president, I would like to see this amendment of this executive order rescinded. The president talked yesterday about the children of Sandy Hook and many other shootings. He brought tears to his eye, and he said as he thinks about the children that were impacted by this violence, he was brought to tears and wishes that we could do something about it. We, as a state and as a people of this country, we have a responsibility, I think, to defend ourselves first. And certainly if we take that seriously, we can certainly defend others as well. If we truly trusted the American people to be trained and to be armed, I think that we would actually see a reduction in violence in places around this world where guns have been allowed and freedom has been allowed. There's been reductions in violence. And if you look around the nation and around the world at places that have tried to restrict or to prohibit guns, the violence has gone up. These are well-substantiated correlations. And You know, I think the answer to Sandy Hook, frankly, is that we should have been prepared. I know one commissioner, previous meeting, talked about being prepared. That's exactly what we're talking about today. The county manager addressed this yesterday in our staff meeting. But we should be a prepared people. I think everybody needs to have a personal plan and explore what can you do to defend yourself, and don't be caught off guard. We have a responsibility to be prepared. With that, you know, House Bill 2052, which was passed in 2013, called the Public Building Security Act, which is a bill that I authored with the assistance of Patricia Stoneking of the Kansas State Rifle Association. In that bill includes a provision for Kansas teachers to be armed. Now, as far as I know, no teacher in Kansas has been able to utilize that provision in that law. But should Sandy Hook happen in Kansas, I'm going to go back to that point and say we should have been prepared. There are literally dozens, if not, I don't know how many elementary schools are in the Wichita area or Sedgwick County area, but there are lots of them. There's certainly hundreds across the entire state of Kansas. Every one of them is a soft target. Every one of them is vulnerable to bad guys coming in there to do exactly what they did at Sandy Hook. And we've done nothing as a people to prepare ourselves. We have the responsibility, I think, to think ahead and to change our ways. We are obviously vulnerable, but to sit back and do nothing, I think, is the wrong answer. And I would just ask my colleagues to think about what we can do as a county commission to encourage the legislature and the governor, perhaps the attorney general, to engage this issue aggressively and to make a statement as much as we possibly can. This executive order is not a solution. In fact, as I think about the mass shootings, and I've studied most of them, this has been a topic that I'm very involved in. I read a stat last week, I believe, of 37 recent mass shootings. I say recent, like over the last year. Maybe it's even longer than that. I'm not sure what the time period is. Maybe it was 5 years. But 37 of the well-known mass shootings, only 3 times did law enforcement actually arrive on scene and fire a shot to stop the violence. The reality is these incidents happen very, very rapidly. And by the time the police can show up and do anything, it's usually over. And, you know, just a couple of minutes is all it takes for someone who's intent on doing these types of things to commit their violence. And to focus on the registration of firearms. And by the way, that's exactly what this is. The idea that we're going to somehow regulate person-to-person sales, it raises a lot of questions to me. And I look at the drone registration provisions that were just implemented a few weeks ago. There's relatively low cost to register and very, very high penalties for not registering. I see that as a model for what they're going to do with firearm registration. When you give or sell a firearm to another person, you do not have to be a firearms dealer. You're allowed to do that. I've sold firearms before to other people, and sometimes to my own family. Sometimes I've given firearms to my own family because I'm their father and I think they ought to have firearms. You know, I own firearms, and I think anybody who's serious about their defense ought to be able to have firearms and know how to use them and be prepared to use them if necessary. But what the president's getting to is he calls it, quote, the gun show loophole. There's no such thing as a gun show loophole, in my opinion. It's been mischaracterized. What this actually is person-to-person sales. The only way to actually accomplish his goals is to actually have a national registration database. And that, in my opinion, is a first step towards confiscation. Right now, we do not have a national database on firearms, and it should remain that way for us to remain a free state. It says here, they shall not be the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. I think when the government keeps track of who has firearms and regulates and mandates that the transfer of these firearms must be controlled by the government, then we are less free people, and we are vulnerable to a government that I don't trust. So I guess I'm very, very, very concerned that the president has chosen to do something that has no bearing whatsoever on what his stated goals are. He wants to reduce gun violence, but what he chose to do yesterday is completely ineffective at accomplishing his goals. Most gun violence is done by stolen firearms. It is not done through people who buy firearms legally. Most guns that are sold are done through places like Gander Mountain and Walmart and other sporting goods stores. And those that are sold at the gun show tables are dealers that do background checks currently. So this idea there's a gun show loophole is just a misunderstanding exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about private transfers of firearms from person to person. And so I guess I'm just very concerned about what this means. It is a significant change. It was, in my opinion, unconstitutional.
production and broadcast costs for Sedgwick